What's the most ridiculous rule you've had to follow at a job? Story 1. At one my earlier jobs, I had to follow a lunch bell like I was in school. Except I worked in the lab, and sometimes the testing I had to do made me miss the lunch bell, and so I would eat later. People reported me, so I ended up delaying testing to meet the lunch. Production went down a lot, but at least I followed the lunch bell. Story 2. People who discover a spill have to stand next to the spot until maintenance comes back with a broom/mop. As the only one working maintenance, I got bitched at in this order. There's a spill. You need to go get the mop. Why did you go get the mop? You were supposed to stand next to it. When I said, maybe you should hire a second maintenance person then, the look on her face every time I said this was priceless. Story 3. I got in trouble for having my 16-yo daughter walk behind me while having a Zoom meeting. By my manager who had her 7-yo walk in, ask a question of said manager, at which time she stopped the meeting to answer her daughter's question. I was actually written up for mine. I quit on the spot after being written up and went on a tirade against the manager. No regrets. Story 4. I worked at a skating rink when I was 14, 18. Typical day shifts were from 12, 7 when the place was open for birthday parties and such. Halfway through the shift, if they decided it wasn't that busy and they might not need you for the second half, they'd ask you not to clock back on from your lunch break. Then you had to wait, off then clock, for up to an hour sometimes, for them to decide they for sure didn't need you and you could go home. If you left without the manager okaying it, you were written up. This was back in like 2003. And the only reason they got away with it is because all of the employees were kids, and we were all friends with each other and with most of the regulars. And we all liked to skate, so most of us were there hanging out until the place closed even when we weren't on the clock. We didn't know that what they were doing was hella illegal. Story 5. I worked in an upscale flower shop during college, and we weren't allowed to sit, even when the store was empty, which it was for the majority of the day since most people called in. So all the chairs were essentially decorative because we had to look busy for the customer that wasn't there, I guess. Story 6. At one job, we had a rule where no one could adjust their own office chairs. If you needed it higher, lower, or tilted differently, you had to submit a maintenance request. This wasn't just annoying. During busy periods, it could take days for someone to come adjust your chair. It felt absurd sitting uncomfortably while waiting for authorized personnel to make a simple adjustment. Story 7. If someone was banging on the door before opening time, we had to let them in. How about no, I'm getting my computer up and running, making sure the waiting room is tidy, getting my coffee and taking a shit. That door isn't opening until our office hours begin. Story 8. I worked at a center that cold called people on behalf of a 2-year technical school. So basically, telemarketing. In a room no one was in but all of us making the calls. I hated it, but I was a broke kid, and it paid $2 more per hour than anywhere else. Only women were hired to work there, and after I was hired, they told me there's a dress code and I had to wear a skirt. I ended up quitting soon after because I became convinced someone had cameras or mirrors for upskirt pictures. It just gave me creepy vibes. Story 9. Not a work rule, but a rule in a place I do work at. I was giving a talk about awareness of violent crimes and what services exist to help victims, aka the charity I work for. I was just getting set up in the hall when I realized I needed my anxiety meds and inhaler before I got started. One teacher who had brought her class to the hall early came up to me and demanded I put my inhaler away. I gave her a confused look and explained, "It's for my asthma, like no, I'm obviously not putting it away, it's medicine. Also, I'll be not even 2 minutes, chill love." She then said, "The school has a strict no drugs policy." Luckily, the head teacher had come back at that point and saw the confusion and said to the teacher it was fine. But yeah, that's how a teacher wanted me to not have my inhaler because it obviously wasn't medication, and I'm obviously not an adult. Edit. Few folk are curious I'm 23 at the time I was 21, so I definitely looked young enough to be student. Only issue is here in the UK school uniform is really common. Also, when giving talks, I wear my work ID lanyard around my neck. It's bright orange and has my charity's name on it, so you'd be pretty thick to get it confused with a school ID badge. Story 10. The way we were supposed to answer the phones. My last job was at a hotel, and while I won't give the entire script, it was supposed to say along the lines of, "It's a beautiful day at hotel. When are you planning your wonderful vacation?" No, I didn't say that, plus more than half the time people already made reservations and likely had follow-up questions or was calling about something else. It was so stupid to say that. I refused. Story 11. My last job was as a cleaner. It was a bullshit job in a care home to supplement my real job there. The supervisor was a micromanaging old bitch, up to and including no stopping for a coffee for 1 minute. It was so bizarre. In my new job, someone was making drinks for everyone and asked if I wanted one. I was like, "Are we allowed?" And they looked at me like I was an alien. Story 12. When I was working at Ross as loss prevention, we weren't allowed to touch the shopping carts. Ever. Even though we are stationed near where they go and plenty of idiots will just walk up to the front door, take their shit, and leave the cart blocking the entrance. If I took the 5 seconds to walk over there and put it away, I get in trouble because I'm leaving my post. Instead, I have to tell the head cashier to either go move them or have another associate move them, even if it's super busy. Ridiculous, lol. Story 13. Tattoos had to be covered, but our shirts were short sleeve. I have a tattoo on my right shoulder that you could see maybe the bottom 10 mm of it with the shirt sleeve. I still had to wear a black armband to cover it. For 4 years, I didn't. No one said a thing. No one commented on the tattoo ever. That last year wearing the armband, without fail, at least once a week, a customer would ask me about it. Story 14. Being obliged to always wear a suit, matching shoes, and tie, even if you had to pick up some stuff from the office outside of normal working hours or in weekends. This rule was also enforced for customer visits. We had one customer which had a parking spot at 2 km from their office, which required people to walk through some muddy field. Even then, we were obliged to wear a suit and matching shoes and tie. Story 15. When I worked as a recruiter in the HR department of a major corporation, I spent hours a day approving and forwarding resumes of qualified candidates onto this one hiring manager, just to create a paper trail of her considering them. Meanwhile, she had the people she wanted to hire, all totally unqualified friends or referrals of friends or relatives also apply. She then would call me on the phone and give me the names of the unqualified dolts to ensure I also forwarded them for her consideration. This was, fortunately, a 6-month consulting gig for me. I never encountered it that blatantly at any of the other Fortune 500 companies I consulted to. But I did have another gig where the staffing manager ordered me to violate multiple ethical and legal standards. I completely ignored those orders and my contract was not renewed. Story 16. No using the bathroom if there are patients waiting to register, which was all the time. We had to wear full-strength pads and pee in them while sitting and registering patients. No drinking anything, even water, in front of a patient registering. Had to text the front desk to beg to go to the bathroom and it would take 20-30 minutes for a reply. Yep, turnover rate as a registration rep at a hospital is crazy. Story 17. I once worked in the call center of a large company where we were treated like shit and got none of the perks the other departments did. We had to work holidays. We were subject to a point system where we got points for any lateness, even if it was 1 minute past your start time or absence, even though technically we had 5 sick days a year and could be fired at 5 points, etc., while the rest did not. The entire company except us was taken on all-day picnics and other events, at least twice a year, etc. The icing on the cake, though, was the day the fire alarm went off in the 25-story building, and as everyone started for the fire exits, the department manager and head of HR yelled for everyone in the call center to return to their desks, as it was only a drill. Half of us left anyway, and likely would have been fired had the building manager not gotten furious and pointed out to the head of the company that it was illegal for us to remain in the building during a fire drill. Story 18. Somebody somewhere was offended by how they were told that the store was closing, so we were no longer allowed to announce that the store was closing or closed. This led to some really long waits, where occasionally a manager would eventually have to go over and help them along and possibly politely tell them we had closed. And of course they'd be embarrassed, because it was almost an hour past closing time, and then we'd still have to wait for the till to be counted afterwards. Story 19. Don't give receipts to homeless people. I worked for an upscale grocery store in an area with a lot of homeless people. There was a lot of ready-to-eat food options, including a salad/soup/hot food bar, sandwich counter, and pizza by the slice, as well as a seating area. Obviously, for someone without a place to cook who likely would get turned away from restaurants, this was perfect. A lot of the local homeless population came in to get food, and the vast majority were decent people, were polite, and kept things clean, even most of the ones with obvious serious mental illness. I even remember a, most likely, schizophrenic woman who would meticulously wipe every inch of the table and chair she used before and after. Anyway, they did a lot of stuff to try to deter homeless people just because they didn't want them seen in the store. First, they tried getting rid of reusable dishes and only having takeout boxes available to nudge people to leave the store with their food. Then they took out all the chairs at the tables and made people ask a cashier for a chair with their purchase, but not let homeless people. Obviously, it didn't work. Cashiers were too busy to deal with that, and homeless people just stood at the tables or used a chair that cashiers didn't have time to collect and lock up again. Then they put code locks on the bathroom and put the code to enter on the bottom of the receipt. It changed daily. Staff weren't to give it out to anyone, and we were told we're not to provide receipts to the homeless when they purchase something and just give them a paid sticker so they can't even take a piss. Needless to say, I didn't follow the rule at all. Got written up for it once when I gave a receipt to a guy who was wearing dusty clothes covered in paint and the manager was right there. Funny thing was, the guy was clearly some kind of contractor/tradesman who just got off work, not homeless. Anyway, I'd been tearing the cardboard takeout containers as the heavy ceramic salad bowls that we no longer had for most of the homeless customers for a while, because fuck the police, so I guess they were right to fire me in the end. They never caught on to the tear thing, though. Story 20. Punching a time clock for a salaried position. Ostensibly, it was because the clock was one of our products, and having everyone use it was part of the testing. But the owners were super old school, and were probably low-key using it to see when people were in the office. Though I barely used it, and would occasionally forget to clock out and have like a 3-day shift in the records, LOL, and that doesn't seem to have been held against me. Story 21 was working at an Office Depot briefly. I quit after less than a week. One morning, not a single customer was in the store. I asked the store manager if I could straighten up the front of the store till a customer came in. No, you have to stay behind the register so it looks like we're prepared in the event a customer comes in. Literally supposed to just stand there like a robot. I went to lean against the wall. Manager calls from the back room after seeing me on camera. No leaning, you have to just stand there. With no customers even in the store, just stand still on concrete behind a register indefinitely. All for a measly $8 back in 2007. I quit the next day. What a fucking joke that job was. Story 22. A college access nonprofit I used to work at has a culture of hugging for staff and students. They mentioned this at my interview, but I really didn't think that it was a rule. Fast forward to when I had started, each morning, every employee had to go around the office and hug every staff member before sitting at your desk. If you were already sitting at your desk, you had to stand up and hug every other staff member as they arrived to work and walked to your desk. It was awful. Story 23. I unfortunately worked at Burger King during COVID. I was the manager. In drive-thru, we had to have customers put cash, coins, and credit cards into a random plastic container they gave us. When giving change back, it had to go in the same plastic container. When handing food out, it had to be in the container. Even a single drink had to be handed out awkwardly in a plastic container. The owner would sit at home watching security cameras and would damn near instantly call the store if someone didn't use the fucking container. So their idea to prevent people getting sick was to make everyone reach into and touch the same plastic container. We were only required to clean it once every 6 hours. Hated that job. District manager treated us all like shit. Fuck you, Judy. Story 24. We're not allowed to keep green scrub pads in the wash bucket. That's more of a health department rule than a store rule. We're not allowed to use the scissors to cut plastic bags. We have to use those little cutters that dull after 3 uses. One idiot left the walk-in cooler open all night, and now we're not allowed to use a bungee cord to keep the door propped open when we're carrying heavy things there. Story 25. No talking to each other unless it's work-related. We started calling out the boss and his son for talking about sports during work hours. That rule lasted until lunchtime. Mandatory shop meeting at 10 a.m. every morning. On day 3, we were all there in the office while boss was on the phone talking about BS to someone. Nobody was working for the whole time he was on the phone. Day 4. Boss wasn't in, so we had the meeting just sitting around doing nothing for an hour. Day 5 mandatory meetings are canceled. Story 26. No headphones. I was operating a reactor vessel which consisted of 2 very loud machines, and the monitoring station was right in between them. It was ear-splitting. So I bought a noise-canceling headset which cut the loud rumbling, but allowed me to hear my coworkers over the noise. Management objected. They didn't want people listening to music while on the job, so they had banned all types of earbuds, headphones, etc. I explained that I was just using the noise-canceling function and demonstrated it to the manager. He agreed that it was very helpful against the noise and saw that I wasn't listening to music or anything else, but he still went with the rules are rules approach, and the ban held. No headsets allowed. I'll never understand how a person can manage with his head so far up his ass. Story 27. Women had to wear pantyhose under their pants. When they said that pantyhose were required, I assumed they meant if you were wearing a skirt or dress. So I showed up on my first day, dressed formally, but of course no pantyhose since I was wearing pants. A co-worker noticed and ratted me out to management rather than telling me directly. The most ridiculous thing was that this was a bank teller job, where we are behind a counter that was intentionally designed so customers can't see you feet or legs, since there are security alarms under the counter. I quit that job after a week. Story 28. I worked a remote position managing other remote workers. Part of their jobs was time-specific, and part of their jobs was not. The previous manager didn't care when they did the other work as long as they did the time-sensitive stuff at the right time. We got a new manager who decided that because the contracts had working hours, had been in there as a guideline in the past, in them, that they were required to be at their desks for that specific time. I was required to message them on Teams at the starting time, and then 5 minutes before the ending time, and report back to her if they didn't respond. I declined to do that. I also started looking for a new job that would treat me like the skilled professional I am, rather than a cog. Story 29. Not going to be the most ridiculous thing on here, but I used to travel a lot of work and had one funky travel story. Basically, I was in Houston for a comic book convention and needed to get to San Antonio for work that Monday. So I called my boss on Friday as I was flying out to the convention and was like, "Hey, I'm going to be in Houston this weekend, so can I just rent a car, drive to San Antonio, and then drop it off to pick up my weekly rental? I can expense them separately. Those one-way rentals can get pretty expensive. Why don't you just fly?" "Well, if I fly, it's going to take 4 times as long." "Sure, but we don't want to have to pay that one-way fee." So that Sunday, I had to go to the airport an hour before my flight, fly to Dallas, wait around for my connection, then fly to San Antonio. Total travel time was about 7 hours from hotel door to hotel door.